Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for attending today's webinar. We're going to give it about a minute to give everyone the opportunity to log in. I'll do formal introductions of all the panelists that we have here. We want to thank you for attending today's webinar, which is it's called Times Are Changing, and so should your governing documents. We have a lot of questions that have come in, as well as a lot of questions that were prepared on the topic of amending documents, on the topic of having a smoke-free building or how you're managing those situations. So we're looking forward to being on the webinar today. We do have a Q&A open. So if you have any questions, please put your questions at the bottom. It's either going to be on the bottom of the screen, it'll say Q&A, or on the top right of your screen. Feel free to put any questions that you have that are related to the topic. The panelists and I will do our best to get to those questions today. If we don't, feel free to reach out to one of us, and we'll go ahead and do our best to answer that for you. For those that want to share the video or that weren't able to attend, if you have managers or board members that weren't able to attend today, we will be posting this on YouTube. We'll share that link after the webinar, and you can share that YouTube webinar with the rest of your managers or board members alike. So it looks like the numbers have gotten pretty steady. We're going to go ahead and do some formal introductions. So I'll start with Erin, ladies first. So Erin, if you could talk a little bit about yourself and also the organization that you represent.
Thank you, Raphael, and thank you guys all for joining us this morning. My name is Erin Dickerson with the Rapid Response Team. I am the head of the Commercial Sales Division for Rapid Response. We are a licensed general contractor that specializes in emergency services. So fire, flood, blood. If it's inside of your building and doesn't belong there, we remove it and then bring you back to that pre-loss condition prior to the event occurring.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Erin. Appreciate you being here today. You always provide a wealth of knowledge. Next up, I have here Don from RV Johnson Insurance. Don, if you want to say a little bit about yourself and the firm.
Yes, thanks so much. We have two offices. RV Johnson has two offices. The insurance company was originated in 1921. We have an office in Stewart and also in Jupiter. I'm the principal at the office in Jupiter. We have our primary business is associations, homeowners associations, condo associations, golf course communities. We currently insure about 260 associations. And certainly we got some questions on here, and I'm sure that we'll hit some of the topics for everyone.
Great. Thank you so much for being here with us today, Don. Next up, we have Stephen with Rosenbaum. So Stephen, if you want to say a little bit about yourself and the firm.
Yes, good morning, Raphael. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us. My name is Steve Brayton with Rosenbaum PLLC. I've been practicing law in the state of Florida for 27 years, specializing in representing condominium and homeowners associations and all aspects of their legal needs. And I'm very happy to be here today. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Stephen. As for myself, my name is Raphael Aquino. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Affinity Management Services. We are a community association management, more of a boutique firm. Our area of focus is Palm Beach, Dade, and Broward County. We manage close to about 60 associations, about 14,000 doors throughout the Tri-County area. So enough about us. I think our listeners are here to hear more about the topic and what's going on and what they can do. So why don't I start with you, Stephen? So, if you can give us a little bit of background on the amendment process and the percentages that are needed, because, there are many changes that many board members, we've been listening from our clients that are looking to make changes to their documents, and some don't have an understanding of what the process is like and what the vote is needed for that.
Sure. So there's a couple of different documents that govern community associations, whether you're a condominium or a homeowners association. Co-ops are a very different animal, but for condominiums and homeowners associations, you have your articles of incorporation, which created your association with the state of Florida. Your bylaws, which really is a roadmap to how to conduct meetings of the board and the members, and typically includes your election process. And then you have your declaration, whether it's your declaration of condominium or your declaration of covenants and restrictions if you're an HOA. And each one of those documents have a provision in them that speak to the percentage voting, the necessary percentage voting interests to approve an amendment. So I've seen documents where, it's a majority of the membership or it's 2/3 and sometimes as high as 75% of the total membership that have to approve an amendment. So usually when we look at updating governing documents, we start with what that threshold is, because that tells us what our likelihood of success is going to be in your community with amendments. And if the threshold is too high, we typically recommend to the association board that we get that threshold down as a starting point with some amendment that's not so controversial, so that we have a higher likelihood of success with other types of provisions. And what I typically hear most is we can't get that percentage because our members are just apathetic. They don't participate in the voting process. And so, there's things we can do to try and manage that as well.
Excellent. Yeah, I know there's many things that need to be kept in mind, especially for the board members and managers, is that's a process that you want to get at least an understanding of what the percentage requirements are. Is make sure you just get a legal opinion and have the attorney review the documents and provide you that information. That way you have that legal opinion and it stays. Also, from a management side, there are some tips that you can do, which is, electronic voting is now becoming a big thing. It's been around for a while, but now after COVID, you're seeing more board members and residents starting to use it. And there's techniques that you can use, which is maybe doing a survey, a simple survey of something that you're going to get a high participation in the survey. So in that way, you get your residents to opt into the system. Once they've opted in and you're sending out then the potential amendments, it's going to make it a higher probability, I should say, that you're going to get the necessary votes that are needed to make the change. And then also, again, referring to the attorney is making sure that they're looking through, because you want to check if they have Kaufman language, if it's in there, so that as changes occur in the law, in the statute, that you're able to apply those changes. So let's get to the next topic here when it has to do with smoking, Stephen. I'm going to leave it here with you.
Sure.
One of the hot topics that we've had is people asking of how they can make their buildings smoke free, where basically no one can smoke. So if you can kind of go high level of what are some of the policies, what can the board do and what can't they do when it comes to creating a smoke-free environment within their association?
Sure. So for condominium buildings, the boards can typically, under their governing documents, regulate the common areas and the limited common elements, which typically under more modern documents include the balconies. So if the association wants to make the common areas smoke-free, they can typically do that by board-made rule. If they want to prohibit smoking on balconies, they can potentially do that as well. There just may be a difference in the type of notice that has to be given to the membership. So while restricting common areas may be a 48-hour notice board meeting, you may need to notice a meeting that's going to restrict smoking on balconies to 14 days. I take a conservative approach to that. And then when you start getting into restricting smoking within units, now we're back to talking about amending that declaration of condominium, because of the way the law works is that if the declaration doesn't already expressly prohibit something, then the inference is you have the right to do that. So if they don't already speak to smoking, we're going to have to amend that declaration of condominium to prevent smoking in units and make the building completely smoke-free.
Okay, excellent. And just out of general curiosity, from your experience, how many associations have really passed like not being able to smoke on the balcony? And is it something difficult to manage? And just asking because I have a client that's potentially maybe considering that.
Yeah, so that's a great question, Raphael. So we talk about these amendments, and then we need to talk about the practical reality of enforcement. It's one thing to put it in there, but then you got to be ready to follow through. Otherwise you're wasting your time. I have some communities that are smoke free. And generally the reason why is because the overwhelming majority of the members in the building want to be smoke free. And then we have, those scenarios where we have a couple of chain smokers, and we've had to bring arbitration cases I do know that in the absence of a specific provision, try and rely upon your general nuisance provision, doesn't seem to be well received by the division.
Okay.
Division of condominiums. So, fining is always an option. How effective that is, condo land, because you can't put a lien on the condominium unit. A lot of my condo boards feel that fining doesn't get them very far. So, you need to be prepared to file legal action and seek an injunction to stop the owner from doing what they're doing. And you're going to need complaints and people willing to step up and testify that it's interfering with their use of their unit. Otherwise, again, it becomes an enforcement issue. Yeah.
Understood. And I do have a question here from Bill that he's asking, does the same no smoking policy apply to common areas of HOAs, including like the streets?
Yeah, I'm not, that's an interesting question. I mean, homeowners associations typically have the right to regulate the common areas. If the common areas include the streets, I mean, certainly if somebody's smoking in their vehicle, driving down the street, you're gonna be hard pressed to deal with that. But if somebody's having a party outside, the rule has to be reasonable before a court is going to enforce it. And it has to be rationally related to some legitimate objective. So if you're telling me no smoking at the clubhouse, no smoking at the pool, no smoking on the basketball court, something like that, I can get my head around that. I'm not sure about the smoking in the streets one. So
Yeah, I would find that a bit difficult as well. Bill
Yeah.
also asked, are quorums needed to change the bylaws?
Anytime you're having a membership meeting on any issue, whether it's amending the documents or whatever the case may be, you have to have a quorum of your membership to conduct a meeting. Typically in homeowners association land, that's 30% of your membership, unless your bylaws provide a lower amount. The statute 720 states it can't be higher than 30% to conduct a membership meeting. And then in condominium land, it's not regulated the same way because there's a separate provision dealing with elections. So you may have a majority of your membership necessary for a quorum in a condo association. So if that quorum requirement is too high, then similarly, like we were talking about with amendment thresholds, we might have to adjust that quorum requirement.
Correct. Excellent. So it sounds like to me that basically, if they're looking to make any changes, they should be contacting the attorney to make sure that they're reviewing the documents and using the proper numbers or percentages that are necessary to make the change. So Aaron, I know, especially in Palm Beach, we have a lot of older communities where maybe they didn't have policies in the past and they had, card rooms. We see that all the time still today. And where they may have smoked in the past and the board decided to make a change and make the building a no smoking building. What steps can an association take if they have a couple rooms or common areas that have that smoke smell? Is there anything that could be done to address that or remediate that?
Absolutely. So each project is a little bit different. The first thing we need to decide is what's the level of contamination, and there's 3 approaches that we can take once we determine the levels of contamination. If it's a light odor that has not penetrated the drywall, then we can generally use a non-invasive approach and clean the indoor air quality. If you have a unit owner that this is the most common when they say that there's a unit owner that's been smoking in their unit and then it protrudes out into a common element hallway, we can take a less invasive approach and clean the air. Once it's penetrated through the drywall, we all know cigarettes are carcinogens, and carcinogens break down everything, including drywall, like your lungs. It's a little bit different of an approach. There's a product called ozone that we can use that's actually toxic to humans. So nobody can be in that space while we were physically cleaning that out. It is hazardous to human health. And that has to be for at least 48 hours after we do the treatment. On the other side of this, if it's an 80-year-old smoker that's been smoking for 40 years in their units, the drywall actually looks like it's crying and turns yellow. In that situation, it's removal and replacement. We cannot get the odor out because it is penetrated all the way through the drywall. You can see signs and symptoms of those things. Usually it's like like a sticky yellow substance that is coming off of the walls, that's going to be a remove and replace. You have to physically take the building materials out, clean, and then reinstall new building material.
Wow.
So those are the 3 different approaches we would be using.
Wow. Okay. Well, at least there's some solution, but it's
Absolutely.
crazy what the damage that can create.
If you catch it early and it's just somebody inside of their unit, we can clean the indoor air quality. If it's years of damage, most likely remove and replace.
Yeah, excellent. I know from a management side, I know it can be challenging. Over at least the past couple of years, we haven't seen a major issue, at least in our portfolio, of smoking in the common areas, just because things have been changing, times have been changing, and most of the buildings already have these policies. Well, we find the challenge, which is why I asked Stephen the question a little bit earlier, is from the balcony, especially we were chit-chatting a little bit earlier, sometimes it's not cigarette smell anymore, it's kind of marijuana smell. So those are the challenges that we're having to deal for management. And as you said, Stephen, I mean, if we don't have residents that are willing to step up and make the official complaint and put it in writing, because many times, neighbors are neighbors. They don't want to, well, I don't want to be the one that's saying something. It becomes very difficult for us to be able to enforce anything if you had those particular policies for the balconies.
As an attorney, if I don't have a I don't have a case.
Correct. Exactly. I kind of wanted you to say that, because when they hear it from us, sometimes they're like, no, that's not true. But yeah, it's important for us, especially for management, to be able to have someone to put something in writing and say, this is what's occurring. So Don, I want to bring you into this topic, because I know many people probably have their ears wide open, seeing what you can do. Insurance has been at probably one of its highest rate. I'm sure you could probably give us some stats, but the cost of insurance has significantly gone up, especially for the properties located on the coastal side. With everything that's occurred, the tragedy at Surfside, I'm sure that has had its impact. So if you can kind of give a high level 30,000 feet of what's going on with the current insurance market, are there any steps that the association can take to either better their coverage or amend the documents to be able to improve their coverage?
Okay, as probably everybody has heard, the insurance market is not in its greatest shape. And this is probably one of the worst markets I've seen in the last 25 years. And what has happened is a couple of the carriers that were big carriers in South Florida, as well as some of the other coastal states, one of them was liquidated on May 16th. It was American Capital. All of those policies have now caused a bit of a problem in certain areas of the state. The Tri-County area is in a very difficult position, and it's mostly because of roofs. And if there's one topic that the associations can address, roofs would be, in my opinion, absolutely number one. A lot of the properties that were being carried by association property carriers, they are now reverting back to Citizens because they're pulling out of the state. So you're seeing a lot of non-renewals. If the roofs are older, and usually in the 18 to 25 year range, they're issuing non-renewals. In some cases, will issue a policy on an actual cash value basis, which becomes a very difficult situation, especially for the unit owners, the associations, and if there's any change with banks, whether it's a new sale or refinance. So if there's one issue that I could emphasize for the POAs, the HOAs, and the condos to do is address the roof situation, because that will be the number one issue. The second issue that we're running into is barrier islands, because even though the barrier islands may have some newer properties, a lot of the older properties on the barrier islands are being non-renewed, and you have to go back to Citizens in a lot of cases for the wind coverage. The difficulty with Citizens right now is they're requiring roof certification forms to be done, and they now require a pretty extensive list of items that you have to submit before you can get approval to go back to Citizens. So those are probably the two large areas of concern. The POA and HOA, because of the documents being the governing for coverages and those POAs and HOAs. And I think Steve probably can comment a little bit on that, because if you do have a claim, those documents become primary. So those are the issues that we're running into, but hopefully we'll see some relief next year. This cycle started about a year ago, and it's the last time we had something like this, it ran about almost 3 years. So that's where we're seeing right now.
Yeah, what it sounds to me, Don, is you know, they're getting smarter when it comes to what's going on with the conditions of the property. And I think that this is going to be something that we're going to see moving forward. There's obviously legislation at the moment. You know, there's a Florida Task Bar report that was prepared of what needs to be done after the tragedy at Surfside. So I guess for managers and board members that are on this call, it now more than ever, it's important to make sure that you're upkeeping your buildings, you know, the roofs, the windows, the things that are important, because the insurance companies, they're going to see what's going on. And with the impacts, the losses that they had at the Surfside and so forth, they're going to start to become smarter. So as managers and board members, we need to get ahead of it much quicker, because if we don't, then the costs are just going to escalate and you're going to find yourself in a very difficult situation. Stephen, I want to kick it back to you. What is legally required for insurance in like condos, HOAs, and co-ops?
Well, you know, there's a couple of pieces to that. So when we're looking at, you know, your traditional high-rise condominium, the problem that we have there is that the Florida Condominium Act doesn't mandate unit owners to carry insurance on their units. And, you know, this is a controversial topic because at one point in time after Wilma, the statute did mandate coverage. And then a couple of years later, when things calmed down, they took that mandate out. One of the big problems associated with that, as Don is very much, is the associations didn't really have a remedy to enforce that mandatory insurance if the owner didn't have it, because the association couldn't step in for the owner and procure the insurance on behalf of the owner. So, you know, unless that unit owner has a mortgage on the unit where the mortgage lender is policing the owner's insurance, because lenders require, you know, insurance in order to underwrite the loan, you have a lot of people in high-rise buildings that are uninsured. And so when you take that piece and you overlay it on an older building, 30, 40 years old, where owners are not taking care of their high-risk components in their unit, the most common casualty loss in a high-rise is water. And I used to represent Citizens Insurance at a previous law firm, and 85% of their claims are water damage claims.
Wow.
And more often than not, the source of that water damage is the water heater. It's the discharge water heater, or it's the air conditioning unit that isn't being maintained. In my parlance, I refer to that those items in the condominium unit as high-risk components. And so what I recommend to our high-rise condominium clients, is that they implement an amendment that specifically addresses high-risk components and gives the association the ability to replace those components if the owner isn't doing it in a timely fashion. Now, that's the kind of thing that I recognize puts a burden on management, because there's got to be an inspection process in place. But let me tell you, it's worth paying management to do that inspection, or paying an outside contractor, engineer, whoever it is, because Aaron can speak to the amount that is caused, that the sheer volume and the cost of repair when you have, you know, you're on the 22nd floor, you have a discharge and it goes down the entire stack of the building, or it goes down 10 floors, you're hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And this is why insurance carriers are pulling out of Florida, because of that lack of attention to these high risk components. I mean, yes, Surfside, you know, certainly accelerated and was a horrible tragedy, which, you know, was a building maintenance issue, you know, as opposed to the unit owner, you know, level. But the more common problem in Florida is the unit owner level. You know?
100%.
Yeah, no, and I would agree. I know when we have to deal with water losses or any of these kinds of issues, The challenge for us is, and we deal with a reputable vendor like Rapid Response. They get the job done, but the challenge for management really where it becomes is having to explain to the resident when they don't have an HO6 policy of what's covered and what's not covered, and explaining to them that, hey, listen, they had to take the baseboards off. They had to remove your laminate floors. That is now going to be your responsibility to place back on, because that's not, the unfinished service like most documents read. So it does become a challenge. I wish that, when legislation had passed, in my opinion, it was a little bit challenging, because what I think was happening on the insurance side, which was a little bit creative that I had heard and then eventually got taken away, was if owners didn't have it, they were going to provide like a package where the association can purchase it for everyone and make it simpler. I don't know if that ever came about or not, but it's definitely something that's much needed. I mean, it's the impact is huge, especially on management and the board and everyone that has to deal with it. I recently interviewed with a potential client that we're looking to take on, and they're being very proactive. I mean, this board is on their game. They're in the process of upgrading their electrical, and they're going to actually upgrade everyone's water heater to tankless water heaters. Just because of the different losses that they've had. So again, it depends on the board and management, but taking a very proactive approach when it comes to avoiding these kinds of losses, because the impact is pretty large, especially in the larger buildings.
Absolutely. And I just want to say one other
Sure.
thing too on this. 75% of all water heaters fail before year 12, especially anything that's made in the 90s and newer. So it's important. And I've seen a lot of success, especially in West Palm Beach, Jupiter, and our high rises on the barrier islands, that they are actively going in and amending their rules and their regulations for mandatory replacement at year 10. They've had a ton of success with that, especially if you have a high renter occupancy in your buildings. It's really important. You don't need to be a high rise to make good decisions when it comes to the components that are inside of condo and co-op buildings. Remember, when it comes to water, it's not if it's going to happen, it's when. And you can help your residents make good decisions by giving them that information and the right information to be able to make those decisions.
Excellent. That's a great tip there. So that
Addition-
leads us straight into, you wanted to say something, Don? I'm sorry.
Yeah, additionally, to add to Aaron's response there, the tough thing for associations and managers and unit owners is what is the cause of loss to determine if it's going to be picked up by the master policy or the unit owner's policy. And it always reverts back to that question, what caused the loss? If it's a maintenance obligation, then certainly it's not going to be picked up. If it's wind, in any of the basics, which would be wind, fire, sudden and accidental damage could be picked up also under the master policy. But that probably is the toughest concept for the unit owner. And I'm sure everybody on this panel has gotten and received calls from either unit owners or managers of how to handle those claims. So it is a tough situation.
Yeah.
That it is. And it's been years of trying to make it right. And unfortunately, we were still in the same situation where, there's no requirements on the HO6 side. So we're having to manage that situation until changes do occur. So we brought up the rental situation. So I think this is a good time to maybe switch gears here. And I know that we have many board members and managers that I know we've gotten asked the question of what's the right move to make. Do we restrict the amount of rentals? Do we become a non-rental building? Or in some cases, even that we're non-rentals, should we allow rentals? So Steve, I want to kind of get from you of what are your recommendations for changes to the documents when it comes to rentals, and how does that impact associations?
Right. So I think the most common reason clients come to us and say we want to implement rental restrictions focus on primarily two areas. One is being able to screen and background check on the renter, meaning a criminal background check, and then also limit the frequency that a unit or a home can be rented to avoid Airbnb and VRBO and a vacation rental scenario. And basically those types of amendments have to be voted on by the membership. And, you're going to have to understand what your membership is prepared to accept and what they're not. The other piece of it is also we frequently have clients ask us to put a wait period in place to new buyers to avoid investors coming in for the purpose of strictly renting the unit. I have communities where they didn't implement these amendments quickly enough, and they've turned into rental communities. In the case of condominium associations, Don can tell you that if your percentage of rentals gets too high, insurance carriers are going to re-rate you to being a resort condominium as opposed to a residential condominium. And that'll have dramatic impact on your premiums. So, and then the other piece to that is both, the statutes say if an owner doesn't vote in favor of certain types of rental restrictions, it's not going to apply to them, but it will apply to the next buyer of that unit or that unit. So I always say to boards, you gotta look at the long term. You have to plan for the long term. You need to do these things now, so that even if you have a portion of your membership not voting in favor of these amendments and they won't necessarily apply to them, eventually that filters out, and you prevent the persons coming in the door from, basically ruining your residential condominium and, residential community, and turning it into a rental community. And that can be a real problem, especially, in HOA world. We see this more in communities because townhomes tend to be more, conducive to rentals, and also, your traditional condominiums and co-ops as well. Co-ops have to struggle with the same rental problems because, while they may be a co-op, they look like a condominium to the outside world, and they are regulated very much like condominiums.
Understood. So Don, I wanted to get your opinion on this because Stephen brings up a good point. Stephen mentions that if the rentals are high, that potentially the premiums could be higher. So maybe if you could give us from an insurance side, what could be the impacts if a building is predominantly rentals?
This has become a large topic. We didn't see up until a couple of years ago that many questions on the applications for general liability. Now we are seeing them. The number seems to be, if it's 25% or less, we don't seem to have any problems. But when you get above 25%, a lot of the carriers are declining. And Steve mentioned resort condominiums. That's a whole another issue. What we're seeing there is that if we can get coverage when there's nightly or short-term rentals, the premiums are quite excessive, and they're running anywhere from $125 to $175 a door, which I think is ridiculous, but that's where they're going. Obviously, claims associated to rentals, when you do loss runs on the buildings and we have to send them out, they're certainly putting a bigger impact on the rental community. So yes, it is a problem, and hopefully it gets better here shortly, but it looks like a lot of the investors are coming into these communities.
Yeah, especially with the migration that we have of so many individuals from northern states, from the Northeast, from the West Coast. We're definitely becoming a place to put your money in, and also knowing that rents and values are going up. For me, from a management side, what I have seen is you definitely have to strike the right balance that's for your community, because no community is the same. You have many communities that are older communities that they're okay with having no rentals whatsoever. What I have noticed is if it's a no rental community, normally the values are pretty steady. Normally, if you have rental, they kind of climb a little bit because you could bring in investors, but there should be some kind of restrictions because if you allow it to be no restriction whatsoever, then you will have the challenges, and the challenges come in many ways. I can talk about an hour just on this. Because you're going to have more abuse on the property. So there's going to be more wear and tear. So there's going to be a higher cost to maintain the property. So that's going to come with the additional value. But either way, those are decisions that as a board, you need to decide what's right. Do keep in mind that there's so many different types of communities. It depends on your community. So the information that we're providing is just general information. You need to do what's right for your particular community. Also, when it comes to the application process, there is many tools that are available. to streamline the process. Because from a management side, what we want to make sure is that we have all the necessary information for the tenants, background searches, if you're doing credit searches, if your documents allow it, that you can streamline the process and make that much quicker for your board to approve, for your manager not to have to be dealing with paper applications, being able to do that completely online. So if you want more information on that, we'll be glad to share the vendor that we work with any manager or board member. Just feel free to reach out to us. So let's get to another topic here that's always been a hot button, especially for our industry for the past couple of years, and that has to do with the ESAs and the emotional support animals. I see all you guys smiling because we see it all of a sudden everywhere I go now to a restaurant. You see the ESA, and it's a shame because the people who have service animals have been impacted because of this. And honestly, it really bothers because those are the individuals in most cases, those are the individuals that need it. And I do understand that the emotional support animal is needed by certain individuals, but it is being abused. So Stephen, I wanted to kick it to you. With regards to the documents, are there any amendments or provisions that you recommend for pets and for the handling of the ESA or the service animal issue?
Yeah, we don't typically recommend to our clients to do any type of amendment to their documents that would be a membership vote, but more of the board implementing a policy that speaks to how the association's going to address those types of requests. And as a precursor to that, typically this is an issue where the community association documents already have either a prohibition on pets or limit the size, the weight of the dog, and it's generally we're talking about dogs, the weight of the dog. So for example, if there's a 25-pound weight limit or a 1 pet limitation, and we have somebody who's got 2 and they're claiming one is the pet and the other one is the emotional support animal, these are the types of issues we encounter. And really what it comes down to is the letter that the requesting party submits to the association from their healthcare provider, and whether or not they meet the requirements established by HUD. HUD being the agency that has issued guidance and opinions and is responsible for enforcing the Fair Housing Act. So, this falls under federal law. As we all know from watching the news, Congress is occupied with much of, other business. And this is certainly not on the top of their agenda, is fixing the emotional support animal problem. So I see this as something that's not going away. It's unfortunate. Clients don't like it. We don't like it. But if they've got a letter that says what it needs to say, you're at risk for being sued. And it's really a strict liability statute. And, the requesting party will be entitled to their attorney's fees. So, we do push back when it's appropriate and ask for supplemental information. But, I'm seeing recently the healthcare providers are getting more sophisticated and they're saying the things that they need to say, where the board's in a position of having to approve those requests. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that that animal has got free reign of the property.
Yeah.
If they're leaving that dog home all day, supposedly they need that for their emotional support, go off to work every day. Animals in the unit 12 hours a day barking and creating a nuisance disturbance, that can be treated just like any other nuisance disturbance. So it's not like there's simply no recourse if there's abusive behavior going on. So it really is a case by case scenario.
Excellent. And Don, from your side, are you seeing any increase in claims from these emotional support animals from an insurance side?
Fortunately, we have not. In most cases, when the issue comes up, the law firms for the associations have been handling them, and I haven't seen any restrictions or questions on any of the applications concerning that issue. So hopefully it'll continue to be handled by the legal firms, and right now we haven't seen anything at all.
Okay, excellent. I know, again, this has been a hot topic. It always is a hot topic, especially from the management side, because we deal with it all the time. You'll have someone apply to an association, see that there's a weight restriction or a pet restriction, and then all of a sudden they show up again with a letter, oh, I forgot to turn in my ESA letter. So what I recommend to board members and managers is you have to be very cautious with the steps that you're taking. There's a cost to doing business. So in our case, we're going to say, hey, we need to get the attorney involved. Last thing we want is an email or something said that shouldn't have been said, or a request made that shouldn't have been made. This is an issue that we're all having to deal with. So we need to deal with it together. And that means bringing in the necessary partners to address whatever questions or concerns may arise from a particular application. So let's go now into the next topic here that we have, which is basically vehicles. Steve, I want to kind of start with you here from the legal side. What are your recommendations regarding changes to the documents for vehicle restrictions with the electrical vehicles and putting decals and things like that?
Well, each community has its own identity. And so, as a board, the association needs to determine, what they're okay with, what they're not okay with. Typically, in homeowners associations and also in condominiums, large pickup trucks become a problem. Townhome communities where there's limited parking, having large, dualies and 3/4 ton pickup trucks, that kind of thing is an issue. We were talking, before we got started about the problem created by golf carts. If you're a community where people, let's say you're a country club community like Don was mentioning, and you've got people driving golf carts all over the neighborhood, that can be an issue. It can be a liability issue. And then they also have, golf carts that are like, not your traditional golf cart for the golf course, but like a golf vehicle that goes up to 25 miles an hour. It's got the windshield. Those are things that you may need to be regulated. So, my approach to this is, I talk to my boards. I say, what is the problems in your community? Let's design a restriction that addresses your specific problems, and then we have to go out and get the votes. Otherwise we have to look at what the situation is with the roads, what the documents already say, and whether or not the board has the ability to implement any policies or rules and regulations without a membership vote in those communities where they can't get the necessary vote to pass an amendment. I look at it primarily from, what does the neighborhood want to do, and what are the potential liabilities associated with some of the vehicles? On the electric vehicle side, I think the issue is really more for condominiums and co-ops, where you have high rises, mid rises, and parking lots, and people want to put in electric vehicle stations, or now under the new law, a natural gas station. So my recommendation to those associations is that the boards be proactive and put in electric vehicle stations in the common area parking spaces, because I think there's no question that the trend is towards electric vehicles. And I think it would actually enhance, the property's overall value and unit values if you have those charging stations, because new owners coming down from the Northeast, that's what they're looking for. They're looking for buildings where they're going to be able to plug in. And if you don't have those stations, or if you don't have enough of them, and you don't want somebody trenching in the parking lot to put in their own, you're probably being short-sighted, and your property values over the long term are going to suffer a little bit.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you. I think that's going to be the new amenity that now, especially the younger generation is going to be looking for. So if you have the whereabouts or the location to be able to put it, I would definitely suggest doing it. The next challenge will come in a couple more years, where now you have the arguments of how long someone has been there and not been there, but that we'll talk about in about a year or two. But it's definitely an amenity that I do see certain buildings already considering, especially the buildings that are upgrading their common areas. They're considering putting electrical stations in there. I know. Sorry,
just to jump in. No, I understand that there are companies out there that will put the stations in for free, because they get the revenue associated with the electric.
Yeah.
So, that can be, a win-win potentially. And then they billing the unit owner for the usage. The association doesn't even have to get into that business. So.
Correct. Correct. No, great point. And I wanted to mention as well, is because enforcement, I know many times from a management side, we get asked, who should enforce, how should the enforcement happen? Number one, you really can't expect management or a board really shouldn't be enforcing anything unless those rules are clear, they've been approved. You've had them reviewed by your attorney, and you understand what the process is going to be to enforce it. Because you can put in all the rules that you like, and if you don't have the way of enforcing it, through either fines or through team members or volunteers, then it makes no sense putting that rule together. So from a management side, at least from our side, we're not one to go out in the evenings. That's something that normally your security guard company is going to do. They'll have the protocols that are necessary and the protocols that they should be following prior to towing a vehicle. In most instances, what we see is first a sticker, 24 hours, and then if the vehicle is there, then they'll tow the vehicle. If the instance happens again, then normally it'll just be an immediate tow. Our recommendation is really just to communicate more with your residents, letting them know what's the process, what are the challenges that you're seeing in the community. So if you're having a parking challenge, just go ahead and send an e-blast to the community so that everyone knows that you're on it from a management perspective and what steps you're going to be taking. Because it is a very difficult situation for everyone to deal with, but ultimately as managers, it is our responsibility to make sure that what's being done for the community, what's supposed to be done for the community is being done. I do have a question here from Dina, and I think it's more towards you, Stephen. It's asking, has to do with commercial vehicles. Dina says here, is a racing car with advertising all over it considered a commercial vehicle? As an example, someone has a racing company printed on the vehicle and it's advertising for different services. They have 4 of these vehicles. So they want to know if that's kind of considered a commercial vehicle.
It depends on how your documents define what a commercial vehicle is. But, typically, if it's advertising for a business, that would be a tip, fall into the category of commercial rather than a passenger vehicle, just a generic passenger vehicle. So, the devil is in the details and the wording, unfortunately.
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you. So let's get into kind of water damage. I know that we've touched on this topic a little bit earlier on and the impacts that it has. I know that this is a big issue for condos and for some HOAs as well. Is there anything, Stephen, that an association can do to amend their documents to protect themselves a little bit better when it comes to potential water damage?
Yeah, that comes back to what I mentioned earlier with implementing, provisions regarding high-risk components, requiring owners to maintain, repair, and replace, their water heater, their air conditioning, their washer, their dry, primarily the washer. Also electrical panels. I know it's not water related, but they also are a potential major source of problems, fire hazard. Surprisingly, I still have a lot of associations where units have electrical panels in them that have been recalled. And that affects Don's ability to insure those condominiums. So one of the things that associated condos particularly need to keep in mind is that they have an irrevocable right of access to the unit in order to inspect the unit, to maintain, repair, and replace the common elements. So, and that may be the case as well in co-ops, depending on what the documents say. Usually in co-op land, your master lease gives the association the right to access the units. Okay, because again, in a co-op scenario, the owners are shareholders in the corporation, and there's a master lease that gives the owners the right to occupy those units. So those associations typically have a right to access those units as well. So we have the ability to get in to inspect. And once we find out that something like Aaron was saying, I have a water heater that's past, 9 years of age, I need to be saying to that owner, it's time to replace that water heater, or at least test it and service it. Let's see what's the color of the water coming out of that. Is it rust or is it clear? So if you got dirty water coming out of the water heater, when you test it, it's ready. It's at the end of its useful life. And this is something that people don't even really think about. So communication is key. Explaining these things to the residents is important. holding seminars, and we can do them now, on a building level by Zoom. It's very easy for, rapid response to, just educate, clients on, what they're, because they just don't know. It's not on their radar.
Mhm.
I think raising awareness is step one, and step two is really, implementing some provisions in the documents to protect the building, because it'll make Don's, loss history it kills Don's ability to write insurance for his clients.
Yeah.
That's the bottom.
Most definitely.
Yeah.
Additionally, on that topic, with the water damage claims, a lot of these carriers are now, if you have a loss run that has multiple water damage claims, they're putting relatively large deductibles on water damage for the future. The other item is that when the unit owners are leaving for the summer months, to have somebody check those units, we have a lot of problems, or see a lot of problems with toilet supply lines,
Well, that's right.
especially to refrigerators, ice makers. We've seen an
Absolutely.
abundance of those lately. And the other issue that's really key is the HO6 policy is the only policy that takes care of water extraction in a condominium unit. The master policies for condominiums and homeowners associations do not cover water extraction from the inside of the unit. So encouraging the unit owners to at least buy some type of policy, I think, is very important, extremely important in South Florida.
Absolutely.
Excellent. Aaron, and I'm sure this is really your topic here.
Mhm.
You deal with this on a day-to-day basis. What are some of the common problems that you see association deal with when it comes to that with water damage issues?
First and foremost, who's responsible is the bill is the number one question I always am asked. And in a water damage situation, time is always of the essence. We can sort out who's responsible for what portion of the bill later. There's laws and there's regulations for all of that. And as an association, you have a fiduciary responsibility to maintain the structural integrity of the building. That does not mean the bill always belongs to you, but you have to make sure that that water gets mitigated in a timely fashion, especially that we have so many absentee owners from Canada, all over the world here in the Tri-County. So it's important to understand that if you know a water damage has affected multiple units, let's say you have 17 to 4, and you have unit owners that aren't present, you still have to mitigate that damage. You have that fiduciary responsibility to get that unit back up and running. Now, with that being said, the most common losses that I tend to deal with are unit owner created. I call them user error, for a lack of a nicer way to say that. A lot of times I see vendors in buildings causing damage.
Yeah.
And there's things you can do as an association. I have one building in downtown West Palm that in one calendar year had 5 sprinkler heads hit by a moving company, a painting company, different unit owners hanging their dry cleaning from them. So when we have move-ins and moves out, they decided that they were going to drain the stack from now on and charge a $100 fee to a unit owner that's moving out of the building. And that stopped their problem from having sprinkler heads being hit during moves. So I think it's really about diagnosing what is your loss history at your property. Is it vendors in your building causing damage? Well, maybe we need to have a plan in place for prevention in that. Do you have a contract with a restoration company with fixed pricing that will lower the cost to the association? And we have one at Rapid Response. And if you'd like more information, I can definitely share that with you. But it's having a plan in place for when these things really do happen, that you have control as the association and you know what the protocol and procedure is for moving forward. So if you'd like any other information on how to prevent the water on your association or your specific needs, I'd love to chat with you offline about that. But it's really about having the prevention, the preventative maintenance, and then the reaction to when a situation does happen. And the communication is really where you win or you fail. That's where the management team is crucial in that communication process, making sure we tell ownership that there has been an incident, and then following up and setting clear expectations with the owners on what they are responsible for versus what the association is taking care of.
Correct. And those are some great points that you bring up, especially when it has to deal with the contractors and who's coming in and out of the building.
Mhm.
And that's why it's so important to make sure that you understand what are the coverages that organization have. If it's a moving company or if it's someone installing a kitchen, whatever it may be, even if it doesn't have to deal with anything that's related to plumbing.
Mhm.
They could cause a damage, as you said, by just hitting a sprinkler head.
Absolutely.
That little glass in there is very fragile, so it can easily break and cause a major water loss. But also for those managers and board members is knowing where your water shutoffs are as
It's
well.
so important.
Many times it's not if it's going to happen, it's when. Even if you can have all the policies and all the procedures, things happen. It's, a building's a living organism, and things just happen and accidents happen. So at least you want to know that, have your team ready. If you have a front desk, if you have maintenance, janitorial, everyone, even your board members, kind of know where the shutoff valves are for both domestic as well as fire. That way, if you have an incident, how can we shut it off? And also understanding where your release valves are, because many times you can shut it off, but if it's on the first floor and you still have 30 floors above you, that water needs to go somewhere. So if you don't have a release valve open, that's going to go right into that unit, even though you shut the water off. So making sure that, at least from a manager and a board perspective, that you have these things top of mind and you have a plan in place, so that if something does occur, because it will occur, how are you going to manage that situation? So Don, I want to kind of kick it back to you, because Aaron brought up of what's covered and what's not covered. I guess maybe if you can give a little bit of a high level. I know it really depends on the documents, but what you'll see the difference between, let's say, the master policy and maybe what an HO6 policy would cover.
Okay. The one thing I'd like to touch on that Aaron just brought up was
Sure.
the fire sprinkler issue. That probably is one of the most expensive large claims that an association can run into, especially if they're in older systems and they can't get the parts. You get into fire watch, and I don't know if anybody's experienced that, but
Yep.
that's 24 hours a day until the parts come in, and that can get extremely expensive. So just for the people that might have the fire sprinklers, make sure they're checking with their agents on that subject, because those can run into well into the $100,000, especially. I had one that it took 42 days before they could get all the parts in, and the loss was well over $150,000.
Correct.
But back to your question about the HO6, fortunately with the HO6 policy, if it's handled properly, the big key component there, when the people are buying that policy, make sure that the documents, if there's any unusual situations in the particular building that they should know about, they need to inform the agent when they're writing those policies, because rentals are another issue under the HO6. So that's a whole nother subject, but make sure that the people that are buying the policy and they are renting their units, either short-term or long-term, they inform the agent when it comes to the coverages. Now, for a breakdown of the coverages, I can certainly get over to you. I have a very extensive list that goes into great detail under the HO6 form of what's covered and what's not covered. But the one issue that we always have trouble with is cause of loss versus maintenance. So that subject is somewhat difficult to explain in some cases, but cause of loss is really generating which policy is going to respond. Most of what we see is breakage of pipes. Unfortunately, they seem to always happen in the middle of the night, and they always seem to take out more than one unit. And a lot of times the people think because in a condominium that it was from another unit, that the other unit's policy is going to respond to take care of the damages within their unit. But we are no fault state. The way it works is, and we try to inform our associations, is that the unit owner, if they suffered a loss inside the unit, report it immediately to their HO6 carrier. Subrogation will take place between the unit owner's policy and the master policy, and it tries to eliminate people getting upset and pointing fingers at each other. And it can get very consuming, and hopefully it doesn't happen, but we do see it from time to time. So please buy a policy, and then also make sure that your agent who's selling it to you knows exactly all the details behind it.
Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. And you brought up, being proactive. So, using that to go into next, Aaron, I know we work together in several associations, being proactive when it comes to hurricane. And I know we're kind of past it. Fortunately enough, we were very lucky this year again, but it's only a matter of time. Every year that passes that we get lucky, it just means that a higher probability that it's coming next year. From a remediation perspective, what can an association do to be proactive when it comes to putting a plan together for like a hurricane? Oh, I think we lost her. So I'll go ahead and jump in because I know we've worked with Erin in the past. Erin and her team do a great job in helping outline some of the challenges that they would see when they come on site should a loss occur at your particular property. Further, one of the things that we highly recommend, especially for our condos and those HOAs that have large clubhouses, is being able to have an agreement signed ahead of time. There is no commitment that you have to use that organization, but it's just locking you in that if a disaster does occur, that you can actually that you'll be on their list of organizations that they'll visit when it comes to that loss. You'd be surprised at how many associations don't do that and then they're running around having to call companies, and they end up using a company that's out of state that may not be licensed just because they need to resolve the issue. And Erin will tell you as well, she'll recommend you to sign not just one organization, but potentially two, so you have a backup plan should a disaster occur with any water damage or hurricane kind of loss. Stephen, I want to kind of kick it back to you here. When it comes to, let's say, a disaster plan, is that something that the board should put as a policy, or what do you recommend that they do? Because many times, we create that for the board, or we'll create in combination with, let's say, a rapid response. Should that be something that's put into as a board policy, or what do you recommend?
Yeah, I mean, a disaster plan is something that the board of directors has the authority to adopt. What you call it, is it a policy? I mean, it is what it is. It's a roadmap of how to handle and how to respond to some type of natural disaster, and the plan has to be tailored to the type of disaster we're talking about. So, if we're talking about a hurricane, that's a very different kind of plan than what we've been through in terms of the pandemic. The Florida statutes provide for condominiums, co-ops, and homeowners associations emergency powers. When those emergency powers go into effect, are driven by the type of event, and what authority the association has depends on the type of event. So in this last legislative session, the legislature did distinguish between a natural disaster such as a hurricane and a state of emergency caused by a biological scenario like COVID-19. And the board's authority is going to be different in those types of scenarios, because having the authority to restrict access to certain portions of the property are usually going to occur in a natural disaster situation where safety, some life safety is at issue, because you could be injured or killed if you go into that part of the building, because it's not physically, it's not safe to be there.
Yeah,
maybe live wires or something like that. So when we talk about disaster plans themselves, they need to have a list of certain key items. I strongly recommend that communities go on to the CIA Community Association Institute website, which is cai.org. They have a number of different publications that are available, which can be a start that can help management and associations. There are certain things that you need to do in advance. If you don't have one in place on game day, you're in trouble. I mean, it's just, the sports teams don't take the field unless they got a game plan for the game. So you got to have a game plan for the emergency. That's just the bottom line.
Yeah.
And you got to have a physical inventory of all your assets, because how do you go to Don and say, I had, this is what was damaged? We don't have an inventory. If we don't have photographs, we got to know what we have, because we got to be able to prove we lost it. They're not going to just write a check. We know that insurance companies don't want to write a check. For your buildings, you want to have your as-built schematics, so that companies like Rapid Response know what they're looking for. know what the building is.
Mhm.
And then, your official records, I mean, this is near and dear to your heart, Raphael, is, if you as management aren't in possession of the official records, or all of them, and they're on site, they better be well protected, because if they're destroyed, you got a problem. So we need, you need to be thinking about that as an association, is how are you storing all of your official records, not just your financial records that management may have, but other documents that may be on site.
It's actually CAI.
Correct. And those are,
I stand corrected. It's caionline.org.
don't worry, we've had some amazing attendees that have actually put it as well. So I responded
Yeah.
so that everyone can see
Yeah.
the actual website. But and you're right, Stephen. They do have, it's a great starting point. I mean, there's a ton of tools, whether you're a manager, if you're part of CAI or not. You should be part of it, especially board members. I know all the chapters, both from Palm Beach down South Florida, we're very involved, and it's great. But we need more involvement from board members, because there's a ton of knowledge that's available to you, and you'll see the resources that are there are plentiful. So we're in the midst of election season, and most of them are kind of done, but some of them are still going through their process. From an HOA side, it's always a bit of a challenge, because there's nothing that's set in stone the way that there is with condos. That's very crystal clear. And it tells you, okay, this is the process. For HOAs, you have to refer to your documents. And again, you should be getting your opinion from the attorney on how to run that process. But I wanted to ask you, Steve, what recommendations do you have for HOA specifically when it comes to the elections? Can they amend their documents to make the process similar to condos, or what can they do to kind of have a similar process if possible?
Yeah, no, you took the words out of my mouth.
Yeah.
The question, I was going to say, adopt the condo process.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the message. I mean, unfortunately, homeowners associations, when it comes to elections, where the bylaws don't kind of follow the condominium election process, it's the wild, wild west. You don't know what to expect. It provides a lot more. It begs for election challenges, and unfortunately, those get very costly. They're draining on the membership and the boards and legal counsel. Okay. So when you go with the condominium style of election, I don't care what type of an association you are, if you're not condo, it's a very specific method, and if it's run correctly, you shouldn't have any problems. There's always mistakes can happen. We're all human beings, but you're gonna eliminate a lot of what I consider gamemanship from the election process.
Yeah, I've always, every time they bring the bill to the table, I'm always crossing my fingers, even though it always gets shot down, to have the same process. I mean, it just makes sense. It makes management's life much easier. We know what to expect. We know how to manage the process. And HOAs, it's just all over the place. And in some cases, it makes meetings close to 6 to 7 hours because of the process itself. So if it was done in a condo way, it would be different. So we've gone through the questions that we initially got. So I want to go through some of the questions here, and I'll ask you individually based on the topic that we have from our audience. I'll start here with you, Aaron. Aaron, they have a question here that asks, do we really have to make holes into the drywall in order to dry the units?
No, you don't have to. It's advantageous for your bill to do that. It speeds up the dry process, because it's not the water I see on the floor that I care about. It's the water behind the walls and the wet drywall that I care about. So if I drill those about quarter size holes, it's just a repair on the back side of it, as opposed to an extra 2 potential days of drying. Average dry time is 3 to 5 days. So if I can do it in 3 days with a hole, you're going to have 2 days less of equipment rental in that unit, 2 days less of interruption in your potential association or inside of the unit owner's home. So yes, it's advantageous for you on a dollar wise and on a project management standpoint. So I recommend it.
Excellent. Thank you, Aaron. You're next, Don. I have here a question from Daniel, and Daniel asked, will electric vehicle charging stations, especially if they're in the garage, result in higher premiums?
Currently, no. We have a few associations that have asked that question, the freestanding as well as the interiors. And right now, there has been no restrictions and there's no exclusions that we've seen to date.
Okay, excellent. Well, that's good news. Next, I have here for Stephen. Stephen, I have a question here from Bill, and he says, does anything in the Florida statute prohibit a member running from a does prohibit a member from collect a sealed ballot from a, well, okay, hold on a second. I think he's basically saying if someone has a ballot and then it gets dropped off and it's not sealed, what's the process like?
Yeah, so if we're talking about an association where it calls for secret ballot voting and a mail-in ballot and it's being hand delivered and the ballot is open, that's probably going to get that, we disqualify that vote because the ballot could have been tampered with.
Correct. Yeah, and that's what we've seen, especially when we've had election monitors. Unfortunately, it is a common thing, especially with the outer envelope, is what I've seen as a challenge,
Right.
where you see a challenge. Sometimes, though, depending on the election monitor, they'll let it slide if it's the inner one because the outer one was sealed. But yeah, there are technicalities. I see what, hold on, I can't remember. Okay, Bill says the correction was, can a member running collect sealed ballots from members and drop it off?
You know, I don't, if, as long as the envelopes are sealed, it really doesn't matter how they get there.
Correct. Yeah, I know we've experienced the same when it comes to, especially when we've had election monitors. As long as it's sealed and it has again, we don't verify signatures that it's signed and it has a proper unit number in the front of that envelope. Again, we're speaking here. I'm assuming Steve is also speaking here for condos. You know, there's not a problem if they're collecting it and dropping it off. Now that something does change if they show up to the meeting, but that wasn't the question that we have here.
Man, I had an election where a lawyer representing, you know, a group of owners dropped off, you know, 75 ballots.
Correct.
You know, something like that. So.
Yeah, no issues campaigning. And then the last question here that I have here is from Glenn. Glenn is basically saying that they have an overseas owner that didn't provide access. Can the association make it a requirement that units must be inspected?
Yeah, I mean, it's if we're talking about a condominium association, it's 718-111-5 grants the association an irrevocable right of access to the unit. You have to provide reasonable notice. If it's an emergency situation and you have to get in that unit and the owner is absent, then you have to get in the unit, and that may involve, you know, the fire department or, you know, whatever you have to do. You know, if it's not an if we're talking about the exterminator once a month, that's a different issue than, you know, we've got, you know, a scenario where there's a water leak and it's causing damage to the building. So it depends on the situation. But if we're looking to do routine inspection for some issue, we've got to give reasonable notice to the owner. A lot of associations have a key policy where they're, you know, the owner's required to have a key with management. You know, that gets mixed reviews depending on who you talk to. But you certainly have a right of access.
Correct. It's one of the challenges that we have to deal with management, especially because many times there aren't emergencies. When there's an emergency, you know, it's unfortunate we don't have access. We're gonna get access. You know, make a phone call, do what we have to do, get a locksmith. But it becomes a challenge, especially when you're doing your annual fire alarm inspections, when you're doing your sprinkler inspections, and we don't have access. And you know, it's important that residents understand that the board has a fiduciary responsibility to do what's right, to do what's necessary for the association. And in many cases, that does mean inspecting. That does mean going into the unit to check for water leaks. The association, in most cases, in most of these large condos, you have 10 or 20 running toilets. The cost can be out the roof if you're not doing inspections as an association. So these are things that I know many boards are very sensitive about it, as you said, Stephen, depending who you ask. But really, an association should have access. Hopefully, as the times continue to progress and technology keeps moving into our industry much faster, with digital door locks and so forth, that'll become a common thing. And then that way people know who went in, what time they went in, and so forth. So that'll provide a little bit of alleviation when it comes to transparency.
Good point.
So
there was a question, Raphael, which is
yes,
actually a good one. And I think from the management side, how frequently, when you have an absentee owner, should that unit be inspected? And then also, I think the follow up to that was, you know, can the associations mandate a home watch if somebody is an absentee owner, seasonal owner. I can take
Yes.
the second half of that, but I think you should take.
Yeah, so definitely. So when I responded to him, what I basically stated was on a minimum, I would say monthly, but you do have to check on your resources. So what do I mean by that? If you're a 30-unit building, you only have a part-time janitorial, you may not have the staff to be able to do the checks that are necessary. You have a portfolio manager. If you have a team at your property, there should be no reason why you're not able to do kind of a monthly inspection when they're out. Again, you're going to want to, if you can do at that frequency, if you can get down to quarterly at least, because at least you should be doing quarterly checks. Because when you're in that unit, again, you're not there to be prying into people's business. You're there to take a look at your AC unit, take a look at your water heater, and at the same time, check all the toilets and all the faucets, because there's an impact to the association if there's water leaks or a flapper that's flapped up and the water's just running. So those are the things that really as an association you'd be doing. What I would do from a transparency side, what I would recommend is have a little tag that you could leave on their counter saying that you were in the unit and this is what you inspected, just with check boxes, so that your team is not spending too much time writing. And that way they feel like, okay, someone was in my unit when they said they were going to be in my unit, and they know. Because many times what owners are bothered by is, oh, I don't know when someone came in or out. So you definitely want to communicate, which I missed that part before. You want to communicate 48 hours at least on a minimum. Normally you can do it just 48 hours in advance. Hey, on these days, we're going to inspect this floor or these particular units. And then if you leave that just a nice little card saying I was in your unit, I inspected XYZ. That way they know that as an association, you're doing what's right for the community.
I think one thing too, I think you have to go and explain why this is also important for the unit owner's perspective.
Yeah, good point.
As a part of the unit owner HO6 policy, generally speaking, don't hold me to the number, but most policies after 14 days of you being gone from that unit, if a water loss occurs, it's considered neglect if you do not have a party checking on your unit. And they will hold you to that. I see it all the time. You will be denied. If you cause a flood and you're gone for 6 months in your unit because you left your toilet on, it's considered neglect and your insurance will not cover it on the HO6 side. So it's really important that we give the unit owners, this is not just for the association, we're also here to help you too.
Excellent point.
And certainly I think associations can implement policies about what an owner must do when they're departing from their unit, as Aaron said, for a period of time, more than 14 days. The routine inspections that, Raphael is talking about from an overall global maintenance perspective is a little different than when the owner is an absentee owner. And in that scenario, the burden is on the owner to make sure that their unit is properly prepared for departure.
Yeah.
And that they've gotten their water shut off, valve shut off, that they have some, and if you want to mandate home inspection by the owner or the owner's having the owner hire a professional company to inspect their unit, that's something you would have to put in the governing documents by a membership vote, and also the frequency of inspection. And if you want to mandate that the company that is being employed to provide that service is licensed and insured, as opposed to the next door neighbor, you can do that too. Because ultimately what Don is saying to everybody is everybody's going to be self-insuring for this. When the deductible goes up,
Yes.
certain degree, you're basically self-insured, because guess what? The carriers have bean counters in the basement, figuring out at what point am I writing the check as an insurance company? Where's the threshold? And if I raise the deductible to here, how many claims did I just eliminate from having to pay? Okay. And so if the insurance carrier isn't paying the claim, who's paying the claim? If it's the association, who's ultimately paying the claim? It's the unit owners, because who's paying the assessments, right? So we're self-insured. We're going to be in a self-insured scenario. So, I mean, it's imperative that, you got to get the word out to the owners about how this affects your pocket. And we know if you want to get people to a meeting, if you bring up dollars, that usually gets it done.
Yep.
Right.
Very true.
Additionally, one more thing I'd like to comment on. When the disaster plan was mentioned earlier, one of the keys that most associations don't realize is that the insurance companies will pay off of pictures and don't wait for the adjuster, because the adjuster could be weeks if it's a major hurricane in a specific area. And fortunately, we haven't had that in a long time, but do go ahead and secure your property, take pictures, and they will pay off the pictures in the receipts. So do not wait.
And that's for any damage situation,
Yes.
any you have on your property. We need to make sure that our first responders are trained. Like Raphael said, turn off the water, photo document everything, because I can be there within an hour, but your guy boots on the ground's video of what's actually taking place on the property is what's going to show the insurance company that, holy cow, we had a major issue.
Yeah, excellent point. And I'm going to wrap up with this last question here. And this one has to do with from Bonnie. Bonnie asked Steve, is a vote for an amendment change secret? Do proxy votes need to be sealed?
No and no.
Boom.
Yeah, amendment votes are not by secret ballot, and proxy votes do not need to be sealed. So typically when we do an amendment, we use a limited proxy form so that, just real quick. So when we talk about proxy holders, think of them as your broker, right? They're just delivering your vote for you when you're talking about a limited proxy. So the proxy holder is just making sure you get counted towards the quorum and your vote gets counted on the questions listed in the proxy form. And so when we're talking about an amendment, we're asking for a yes, no vote on the amendment. And, Raphael was president of his association, and we put Raphael down as proxy holder. He's not changing your vote. He's just making sure your vote gets counted. Okay. And yes, that's got to be signed by the designated voter for the property. And depending on if you're a co-op, condo, or homeowners association, we've got to look at your documents to see whether or not there's got to be a separate voting certificate designating who's authorized to cast the vote for that property, whether it's a unit or a home. So if you're doing an amendment to your documents, at the risk of sounding self-serving, you really need to have legal counsel assist in that process, because it's not as simple as it might sound. The big push that where the board can be most effective is lobbying for the passage of the amendment and getting they're the boots on the ground. Yeah. But the preparation and making sure you're doing it the right way has got to come from legal counsel.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Stephen. Well, we'll give everyone an opportunity to do a little closing remarks. I want to start with you, Erin. If any last golden nuggets or tips that you want to provide to our listeners.
Absolutely. Well, first off, thank you guys all for staying on this call a little extra with us. If you take away anything from what we were talking about on the water damage side today, it's having a preventative maintenance plan in place and having your contractor in place for when that issue does occur. Let them get to know your property. Let them see what your issues are and what your tribulations are at your property. Everything is so property specific nowadays, but we see water damage all the time, and we can help prevent that from you. And as your partner in restoration, that's what we should be doing. So make sure that you do your due diligence with that.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Erin. Next up, Don.
Yes, I think probably the big item, since we haven't had any natural disasters recently in the Tri-County area, is the relationships with your vendors, your roofers, your landscape people in the event that we do have the next storm that comes through. And then also have your pre-meetings where you know exactly how you're going to pay for certain damages that may take place. And especially with those relationships, a lot of them, if you have a super relationship with your roofer and your landscaper, they'll come out, get the work done, and we'll get the claims and submitted. And typically the adjusters that are working the areas for those disasters want to get them paid quickly, and it works out for everybody if you do have those relationships in place.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Don. Stephen?
Yeah, I think my message would be is be proactive. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone to legal counsel, and let us help work with your management team to educate your membership on what these hot button issues are and how you can actually save money for your community. And identify these things in advance, plan in advance, like we were talking about with the disaster plan. be proactive, start looking at these issues now. You can't start putting a disaster plan together in June. I mean, you're already in hurricane season by then. And yeah, the season to be more active at the tail end, but you know, we need to take into account, we're still in a situation, supply side shortages. And if you need supplies or materials, you know, you don't want to be waiting to the last minute to procure what you need to be ready for a disaster. So.
Excellent. Thank you so much. As for myself, I really kind of go pretty much of what the team here has said is just being proactive, and more importantly is having a preventative plan of understanding what you need to do for your particular piece of equipment. We mentioned water heaters, we mentioned ACs, just really having a plan with your either staff on site, or if not with a contractor, making sure that they're addressing those concerns. As Don said a couple of times, insurance costs, we don't see them going down for some time. Last time he said it was about 3 years. So I would agree. It's going to be some time before things come back to normal. So in the interim, you have to make sure that you're doing your part to keep your losses at a minimal, because if their losses continue to go up, those premiums will continue to go up as well. When it comes to the changes and into amendments and challenges with ESA, as all of our participants today have mentioned, it's just being really building that relationship with your partner vendors, relying on them, speaking with them, even if it's just, hey, look, these are my challenges, what can we do? You're going to find that if you're working with the organization that you should be working with, they're going to be there for you. They're going to guide you and walk you through the process. You're not alone, whether you're a manager or whether you're a board member. In closing, I wanted to thank the three of you for allowing me to host this. I wanted to thank the team behind the scenes, Katie and Ashley, for helping put it together. And lastly, I wanted to thank the board members and managers that attended here today. As I always say, it says a lot about you, your leadership to the community and the commitment that you have to the position that you have for your particular association. Thank you all. We look forward to seeing you at our next webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you, Raphael. Thank
Have
you
a happy
very much.
holiday, everyone.
Take
Bye-bye.
care, everybody.
Care.